Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming. This is our first session of the year and of the term, and we are very happy to have Professor David Enoch join us for this kind of like his first talk in Oxford, although he did give a seminar on Monday, which was very well attended as well, and very interesting. So, Professor Enoch is the new professor of the philosophy of law at the law faculty, and he's also the Rodney Blackman Chair in the philosophy of law at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And I also that's an appointment at the law faculty and the philosophy faculty. So we're very happy to have you, and the floor is yours. So 30 minutes of the talk, and then followed by 45 minutes more or less of Q&A. And then, as usual, we do go to the pub for a more informal get together. So yeah, over to you, David.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much for inviting me. Thanks for showing up. Two apologies to start with. I have this cold, so that's going to be fun. But I think it should be okay. The other is that I'm sure many of you know about the things going on in my home country. Some of these are just horrendous and unprecedented. And for me, and I know for many other Israelis, one of the things it meant is that I wasn't able to think straight for like 2 minutes, I think, over since Saturday morning. On the other hand, like perhaps the most sane time I've had this week was when I was teaching. So I'm looking forward to this for this purpose as well. So yeah, I hope it's gonna make sense. There's also a handout. If you don't have one, I don't know if there are more copies, but if not, perhaps you can share. There are no huge surprises there, and I will be going through things, but it may help following. All right. So this is about agent relativity. When people about agent relative reasons, and more specifically about deontological constraints. So when people talk about agent relative reasons, they distinguish between agent relative and agent neutral reasons. Agent neutral reasons are things like perhaps the reason that you have to prevent suffering. It's the same reason that I have to prevent suffering, and it's about anyone's suffering. It applies to all agents neutrally. But some reasons are not like this. So if I have a reason to read a bedtime story to my daughter, that's now like an 18-year-old example, but still, then that's not a reason that you have. You may have a reason to read a bedtime story to your son, but that's a different story. Right? I have a reason to read to her, and that reason we want to say, even if somewhat pre-theoretically, that reason applies primarily to me, and it does not apply, certainly not in the same way to you. It is relative to the agent. And there may be many other examples of agent relative reasons. I think it's fair to say that in terms of common sense morality, we have both kinds of reasons. We have reasons that apply to us neutrally, and we have reasons that are agent relative. The one I gave an example of is a partiality kind of reason, but there are other kinds of agent relative reasons. For instance, reasons having to do perhaps with prudence. So my prudence is somehow more relevant to my reasons than to yours. Perhaps with things like, if I have undertaking playing the cello, then I now have a reason to practice the cello. Now, playing the cello, especially playing it well, is of impersonal value. But that doesn't mean that the reasons this value generates are the same for all of us, because if you've taken on a very different hobby, then you don't have a reason to practice the cello, and I do, right? So that reason is agent relative. So it seems clear that there are these reasons. But more than that, it seems clear that if you are a deontologist, you are committed to agent relative reasons. Here's why, so the story often goes. If you are a deontologist, you accept deontological constraints. That is, you think that at least sometimes there are things that we shouldn't do, even if doing them will tend to maximize the good. Not necessarily always, perhaps you're a moderate deontologist, that's fine, but at least sometimes you think that that's the case. And then in philosophical discussions, it's very often that situations come up where the question arises, well, should you violate a deontological constraint in a case in which violating it will minimize the number of violations of that very constraint? So here's the example I use in the paper. Suppose I'm a very honest politician, and I'm running. I'm running an election campaign, and the person I'm running against is not honest at all. And suppose that there is a deontological constraint against lying. So in that respect, there are going to be many violations if she wins, much worse than if I win because I'm so honest. But suppose that in order to win, I have to lie. And so you may think that this is a case in which I may, trying not to use the permissible kind of may. There's an option in which I violate the constraint in order to minimize constraint violations. Okay. Well, if you're a deontologist, should you think that's permissible or not? And the answer comes up in the literature almost without exception. No. If you're a serious deontologist, there should be at least some cases in which you vote nay on violating a constraint, even when doing so will minimize constraint violations. I think there are two reasons why. This is, as far as I can tell, it's pretty consensual in that literature. And I think there are two reasons why. One is just direct sort of intuitive plausibility. We're not saying that you then have to think that it is never okay to violate a constraint or infringe a constraint in order to minimize violations, but just that there are some cases like this, right? And we can come up with examples, killing one innocent person in order to prevent two other innocent people from being killed, and so on. And there are just going to be intuitive cases in which it's clear that we're going for, that the deontologist should refuse to violate a constraint even in order to minimize constraint violations. And furthermore, arguing against these intuitions, that's going to be a very awkward dialectical position for the deontologist, because these are the very same kind of intuitions that ground their commitment to deontology to begin with. So that's one kind of reason why the claim that one ought not to violate a constraint whenever this minimizes constraint violations, why that's central to deontology. The other one has to do with what's now been called in the literature for a couple of decades, I think, the consequentializing project. So some people think that deontology can be consequentialized. And what this roughly means is that for any deontological theory, we can construct a consequentialist theory that will typically involve constructing a magnitude. We shall call it the good, right? But a conception of the good such that maximizing it requires all and only the actions that the relevant deontological theory requires. So that we can construct a kind of a perfect consequentialist surrogate for your favorite deontological theory. And there are interesting discussions in the literature about whether or not deontology can be consequentialized. I think that what I say in this paper can, at the end of the day, be relevant to that. The point I want to highlight now is that if you think that whenever you can violate a constraint in order to minimize constraint violations, you should do so, then it's going to be very hard to resist consequentializing, because then you can just add the relevant constraint violation into your conception of the good. And you seem to be working with a maximization conception. So you are, in relevant respects, either a consequentialist or very easily consequentializable, or something along these lines. All right. So deontologists need to say something like, it's not always okay to violate a constraint, even in order to minimize violations. And that seems to commit them to agent-relative reasons. Why? Well, because if I'm now considering lying in that campaign, and I'm saying, no, I ought not to lie, and people tell me, look, but if you don't lie, you will lose. And that means that there will be many more lies and more serious lies in our public political life. And I say, no, I still shouldn't lie. Then it seems like I treat my own lie somehow as more seriously negative or more strongly reason giving for me than the lies of my competitor. Okay. I seem to think that my lies count for more, not from the point of view of the universe, as it were, but for me, when it comes to my reasons, they count for more. It's more important that I not lie than that there not be lies by someone else. And that seems like an agent-relative commitment. So deontology, so this is the lesson of the first point on the hand, of the first bullet point on the handout, the first section. Deontology seems strongly committed to agent-relative reasons. I should say this point is now controversial in the literature. It's not too controversial, but there have been some people who have questioned it. We can get to it a little bit later. I think I referred to it briefly in the paper. Okay. Um, so what I want to argue next is that deontology can't have what it seemingly cannot do without, and then to offer a different way of conceiving the kind of agent relativity to which deontology is committed. But let me say right now, the defense I offer deontology is qualified. So what I end up concluding is not something like this is the right structure for a moral view, but rather if there is a right, if deontology has a chance, this is the right structure for it. And I am not sure whether I'm a deontologist or not. I'm sure I'm not the kind of deontologist that I attack here. And so I think that if you want to be a deontologist, that the way I will argue for is the way to go. Okay. I'm also watching the time, so I'm going to be quicker from now on. I did want to set things up roughly, right? The main objection I have to this kind of agent relativity is the one I put in terms of what I call the appropriate question test. Really intuitive idea there. We don't just have intuitions about which actions are right and which are wrong. We also have intuitions about which differences do and which don't make a difference, morally speaking. One way of capturing it is to ask, well, if an agent asks about this difference, does that make sense? Or does that make us suspicious about the agent, right? So I give silly examples in the paper, right? Things like you're standing there wondering whether you should divert a trolley, right? I give you some information, how many people are on each side or whatever. And then you ask me, wait a second, how much suffering will be caused to loved ones in each case? I'm not sure this should make a difference, but this is the kind of consideration that makes a difference. If you ask this question, this in no way reflects poorly on your moral character. But if you ask something like, wait a second, of the 5 and the 1, does anyone there do analytic metaphysics? So that right off the bat sounds suspicious, right? I mean, maybe just me. I was hoping for a little bit more by way of laughter. But that's yeah, pity laugh. That's the way to go. So maybe you have some fancy story rendering that relevant. That's a possibility. But absent such a story, this question does reflect poorly on your moral character. We are baffled at this kind of question. This question is inappropriate, and that seems to show that whether someone does analytic metaphysics or not is not by itself a morally relevant difference when it comes to diverting a trolley that will kill them. If you accept this kind of intuitive test, we can then use it to ask about things like the following. So you tell me that I have like different ways that I can act, and you tell me how many people will die either way, or how much suffering will be caused, and so on. And then I pause and ask you, wait a second. Of the different people who will die in the different options, will any of them be killed by me? Does this sound like a morally appropriate question to you? So I see that everyone agrees that it does not. No, I know that not everyone does accept this. And I'm not sure I have much more to say to those who, I mean, you may get off the boat right here. To me, it seems very clear that the questions you should worry about in such circumstances are all about the patients, those you are acting on, those you will have an effect on. It's not about you, right? There's something fetishistic about it. I think I quote Johnston, I think. So we're calling this the pornographic attitude, where instead of focusing on something else, you suddenly focus on you. And that seems to me to be a very unattractive way of thinking about morality. But if you don't share the intuition, you may get off the boat here, but you don't have to, because perhaps by the time I present an alternative, you will see that it's at least a little bit more attractive than this way of thinking about things. So that means that at least one way of looking at the, one way of presenting the ontology cannot work. Here's something from Brown. It's on the handout. Thus, for example, the side constraint rights theory gives me the aim of seeing to it that I don't violate any rights, but gives you the aim of seeing to it that you don't violate rights. And that seems to me to be to fall victim precisely to the appropriate question. It can't give us these different aims, because it's not about me. The relevant aim is roughly not to harm him or her, or to help them, or I don't know, to respect their dignity or something. It's about them. It's not about me. Um, right. Um, and here's another way of trying to pump this intuition. Compare this to partiality cases. In partiality cases, this actually does make sense. So there's maybe a trolley case, and you tell me how many people were there. Wait a second, is any of them my son? And that question seems to make perfect sense. If you compare, is any of them my son, to will any of the killings be by me? I hope this helps at least some of you. Uh, I see the smile. I'm sure it's not everyone, but I hope this helps at least some of you feel that there is something suspicious about this inward looking perspective. Okay, so this is the main point of section 2. And by that time, what I hope you see is that deontology really needs agent relativity, section 1, but there's no way of defending it, at least not thus understood, section 2. So we need an alternative solution. Surprisingly, it may come from an analogy with a point in epistemology. Now, I'm sure by now many of you have experience writing a paper and writing. I cannot get into this further here, but I hope to address it in future work. And we all know that hope is easy. It's not a promise. It doesn't always. So I have this paper in epistemology from more than 10 years ago, and I say that I hope to address this. This is it. I'm making good on that promise now. It only took me like 11 years or so. Okay. So just real quickly, there's this whole discussion in epistemology about peer disagreement. Roughly the question, well, uh, based on your own devices, you are forming your opinion on whether P, suppose you come to be fairly confident that P, based on the evidence available to you, but then you find out that someone else whom you think is roughly as good as you are at forming opinions on such things, and who is privy to the same evidence, actually came to believe that not P. How should you respond epistemically? And there are different ways of going about it. One way of going about it is to say, well, you shouldn't care. You should just follow the evidence, the first order evidence. Why should you? I mean, it's just social pressure, right? Why should you care about what other people think? I don't think that anyone seriously accepts this. I mean, if you do, when it's just one person, we can add more and more people there and see when you break, right? It doesn't make sense. Um, Another possible way would be to go with the extra weight view, according to which my view should count for more simply because it is mine. That's why. Um, and that doesn't seem rational either. I give the example of two thermometers that you think are equally reliable, but suddenly give a different reading. Um, it's an interesting question how to proceed, but saying something like, well, I should believe this thermometer. Why? Because it's mine. That seems clearly irrational, right? I think the same is true for my own first response to the first order evidence. So this doesn't make sense. And many people think that the only alternative is the equal weight view, according to which you should give equal weight to your own view and the view of your peer. After all, you thought you were pretty much as good as each other in responding to the first order evidence. This will create horrible results in our epistemology, especially in a more moral and political epistemology, right? This means that, I mean, Adam Elga, who actually goes for this view, mentions an objection he calls spinelessness. You're going to have to suspend judgment on pretty much everything. Good luck with that, right? It's kind of a contingent skepticism. And I argue in that paper for a totally different kind of view. The main line is the following. Of course, you shouldn't give your view extra weight. That would be, I don't know, epistemically chauvinistic. But what you should do is recognize that when it comes to forming your own beliefs, you have a special role to play. An ineliminably special role to play. You cannot just treat your own views as if they were someone else's, because even if you try to do that, you will be doing that from your own point of view. Your point of view is not escapable for you. And this, I argue, undermines the symmetry ideal. The equal weight view relies on a kind of a symmetry ideal. If initially I think that me and you are roughly as good at forming opinions on this matter, then I should give equal weight to me and you. Right? That's the thing underlying the equal weight view. I say that of course, symmetry ideals are great often, but not here. Why? Once you recognize the ineliminable role you play in forming your own beliefs and credences, you know that symmetry stuff is out the window. And then we can go with other views. And what I end up saying, without giving a full positive theory, is that you may recognize your special role in forming your own beliefs and credences. In fact, in a way that will lead to having similar credences and beliefs as you would have had you given your own view extra weight. But that's not the extra weight view. You don't treat the fact that it's your view as reason given. You don't think, well, here's one person's view, here's another's. Let me give more weight to this one because that person is me. That would be epistemic chauvinism. Rather, you respond to the first order evidence and the rest of the evidence in the appropriate way, fully foreseeing that this will lead to your view having been given extra weight or something like this. It's not your reason. It doesn't count in favor, not even in your eyes, of a view, that it's your own response. So the metaphor that I like here is that the fact that it's you is not a part of what you're looking at. It's a part of what shapes the looking. Now, you're not an idiot. You know that. So you know that at the end of the day, you will reach beliefs or credences that are similar to what you would have reached had you given your view extra weight. But that does not mean that you're giving your view extra weight. End of epistemology detour. And as I'm sure you can see now, this is now section 4. This is what I want. What I want to say about deontology is analogous to that. The best hope for a plausible deontology is the following: the fact that a violation will be mine, that is not any kind of reason for action for me, at least not in the general case. But that doesn't mean that we have to go consequentialism and fully neutralist between my violations and others. Nothing like this follows. Rather, you should recognize that the fact that it's you doing the deliberating, that it's you, the relevant agent, that it's you who are going to act, that has an ineliminable role in your actions, in determining the way your agency plays out. And once you do see that, what this means is that you know that the symmetry ideal is out. You can't view your own actions or your own violations in a way that's entirely symmetrical to the way in which you view others. Not because that it is your violation is a reason for you. No, it does not count in favor or against the action more so than other violations, but rather because you have this special role in your own deliberations. Even if you decide to treat your violations just as anyone else's, it will be your decision to treat your violations as anyone else's. So what I suggest is that the right way to think about the agent relativity that is a part of deontology is as backgrounded, in the following sense. It's not a part of what you are looking at, the considerations that you take to be in favor or against some options, but rather it's a part of what colors the looking. And you are not an idiot, so you understand that if you will follow this kind of deontology, the kind of things that you will be doing or the kinds of actions that you will be thinking are or are not permissible will be extensionally they will be co-extensional with what a deontology that actually treats the fact that it's you, your violation, as a reason. They will be co-extensional with those. But that doesn't mean it's the same view. It's not the same view because you don't treat that as a reason. You are not subject to this pornographic attitude kind of fallacy. You don't care. You never ask the question, but will this violation be by me? You don't care about that, right? You're just responding to the relevant reasons in a way that, as you foresee, will end up recommending the same actions that would have been recommended had it been a reason that the violation is by you. And I think, though I really can't commit in any way on interpretation, I think that this offers a nice reading of the Kant quote that I have at the top of the paper and the handout. The goodwill, all of you know that quote, the goodwill is good not through what it effects or accomplishes, not through its efficacy for attaining any intended end, but only through its willing. Right? That's the thought is it's not about looking at certain violations and seeing whether it will be me. I'm not trying to see whether my will have been contaminated. This is not what you should be looking at when you are asking, say, whether to bomb a highly populated area and whether the collateral damage is permissible or whatever. That's not. You should be looking at them, not at you. And I am trying to give you to give you precisely that. Okay, so this concludes section 4, which gives you, I think, the main line. I'll just use a couple of more minutes for the rest. This does not give you the full story. In that old epistemology paper, I try to give more by way of a kind of epistemological picture that will fill in the details here. I think you can do something similar here, but here's a huge promissory note. And that's why I said that my defense of deontology is qualified. According to this picture, deontological constraints constrain the will directly, as one may perhaps learn from the Kant quote. So it's not about a reason that you have to see to it that there are less lies in the world. It's not even about the reason that you have to see to it that there are less violations of constraints in them. Nothing like that. It's about the reason you have directly not to lie. And if you're a deontologist, you must give an account of those. Why is it that we have such reasons? A reason not to lie that is not identical with, not reducible to, a reason to see to it that there are no lies. You may even have a reason not to cause someone suffering that is not identical to a reason to see to it that they not suffer. Okay, that's a crucial part that we need for the deontological picture, and I don't offer such a story. Here's what I do say: either you have such a story or you don't. If you don't, you're probably out of the water already. But if you do, then you should endorse my picture of agent relativity, and then you should be okay. We can talk more about that, of course. Then I have this last section on implications. I'm just going to mention maybe a couple. Some of you may know the paradox of deontology. Roughly speaking, if you care so much about lies, shouldn't you care more about more lies? If you care so much about lies so that you defend a deontological constraint against lying, then if you can minimize the number of lies by lying once or twice, surely you should do that. The thought is that deontological constraints are necessarily irrational. There are different responses in the literature. I'm not going to go into those. I don't even go into them in the paper. But I have a story to tell. Right? It's not as if you care about your violations, your lies more than others. No. The fact that it's an agent-relative reason is in the background. It's not a part of what you look at. It's a part of what colors how you look at other things. If there is a good rationale for a constraint directly against lying, then the paradox of deontology does not pose a further problem. If there is no such rationale, then deontology is out of the water anyway. Okay. There are also some implications to time relativity, to the success or failure of the consequentializing project, and to the intending foreseeing distinction, and a couple of even more speculative things there at the end. But I think I should stop here.
You could just keep going, but thank you.